Hi everyone, my name's Paul from Bernie's Learning. So today what we're going to be looking at is how to use VBA to loop across columns. So most people, if they're familiar with VBA, are used to going down in a set of data. But in this video, we're going to show you how to go across. And we're also going to show you how to search both columns and rows simultaneously, and then also make those loops dynamic to allow for changes in the data when they get smaller or larger. Alrighty guys, and if you need any of the code, it is on the website, so let's get into it.
The trick to being able to loop across columns is to make sure that you're using the right sort of cell referencing that makes your life easy. So you've got a couple of examples up on the screen to show you two examples of how you reference cells. So one of the ways is to use the range method. So in this particular case, if I run the macro there, I get a value of 1. And then we've got a slightly different version of the referencing of cells which works pretty much the same, and you're using cells instead of range. And the main key difference here is we have the separation of the row value and the column number, and that so in this case we've got A2 as the cell that's going to place the value, and you can see it works just fine. But this method is the one you want to use for being able to cycle through columns. And the main reason for that is that we can replace the A value with numbers. So row A can equal 1, row B could equal 2, row B would equal 3, and so on and etc. So if I click the play button now, this should appear in row 2 in column C. You'll see it does. And the fact that we can swap the letters for the numbers means that we can use them fairly easily in a loop to be able to go across the columns. So we've got an example of some code here, and all the code that I am showing the screen you can get off the blog that goes with this. There is a link to it below, and it has all of this code in there. But basically, the code is fairly straightforward. And just in case you haven't used a loop before, essentially the first thing I've done is declare a variable as an integer. And then the next stage is to put a for and a next loop in. So basically, the code loops through the for and executes the code in between. Then it hits next and goes back to the top of the again. Now the value of that variable as it goes through changes each and every time. So in this case we've got column which equals 1, so that means it's the value that column equals, that the col equals as it is going through for the first time. Now once it hits the loop and goes back and starts again, we have a command here in the line which tells it to go up by a value of 1. So that means the second time it goes through, it's going to have a value of 2 and 3 and 4, etc. So we can use that value to be able to change the column reference in numbers. Instead of using A's, B's, and C's, we're using 1, 2, and 3, and we're using that same cell reference. And so we can get this to produce a number. Now I've just put a simple code in here with a value of the column, and when we run that code it'll go up by 1 and across the screen in the first row, and you'll see that if I scroll right across it's taken it all the way across to 100 values of 100. So it's basically gone straight across that row 100 times. Now obviously that's a fairly straightforward piece of code, but you may also have the situation where, let's say you've got a piece of sales data and you want to search the sales data systematically going across the columns and then down the rows. So we have a bit of code here which is just a variation on essentially what we've got here, and it isn't a lot different. Should actually indent my code, it makes it easier to read. And all we've done is a loop on a loop. So we have the original code here. So this was the original code we had with the column, with the declaration of the column variable. And what we've done is done a loop on a loop. So essentially what we're doing is saying we go to row 1 and then we search across. Then we go to the next row and we search across, and the next row and we search across. So the only thing we've really had to do is add an extra, declare a new variable, row in this case, and then we've also referenced that row. So essentially both the column value and the row value are changing as it moves through the loops each and every time. So that's a simple way. Now the last thing we're going to show you is how to make and if we run the code just to show you what it does before we move on, and you'll see now we've gone through every cell 100 by 100. Now I won't go all the way there, but basically 100 by 100. Now, one of the things though with this sort of thing is that it's fairly simple code we've shown you, but you will have the situation where, for example, if we use the example again of the sales report, where you are doing the same sales report each and every month or each and every week, and the length of the sales report may vary, or the width of it for whatever reason. So if we want code to be really efficient, we have, or to make sure that our code works no matter what happens to the sales report, we have really two options. Option number one is to make the length of the row and the column so wide that it's never going to be exceeded, which is relatively inefficient, or we can make it dynamic. So to make it dynamic so that it changes, we can use a command here, which basically gives you the number of columns or the number of rows. And we'll do rows first. So if we do rows, and just so you know it's just not producing number, I'm going to add 4 rows. So the last row that is used now in this sheet is 104. And if we push play and run the code, you can see that the value that it returns is 104. Now if we change that to columns, we can use exactly the same command, except now we can put in columns. Now we did 100 across, so that means we should return a value of 100. Okay, so once we can do that, then what we can do is we can take this command and we can apply it into our loops to make them dynamic. And again, the code isn't really complex or anything. Essentially, the things that we've added is we've got a variable for the last row and the variable for the last column, and we've got those two commands we just went through, pasted in here, and we're assigning the values of the last row and the last column. So that means when we come to use our last row, we're only going as far as we need to and no further to make the code efficient. So in this case, it would go from 1 to 104 because that's the current length, and then the loop within the columns would go to the last column, which in this case currently in the spreadsheet is a 100. And so that means it makes your code efficient. It means that your code will cope with any variations in the length or the width of the data that you're trying to search, and generally just make your code efficient. So that's all we've got for today. So I hope you found it was useful. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe and visit us at Bernie's Learnings. And as I said, all the code that I've shown you here is in the blog that is associated with this video, and the link is down in the description. Okay guys, we'll see you next time.